I really want to talk to you for a few minutes about where we are. And this is not a speech that I would have given a year ago or a year and a half ago. And I've thought about it a lot, and I just finished and sent to my publisher at Regnery a new book that'll be out in May called To Save America. And the subtitle of it is Stopping Obama's Secular Socialist Machine. Last year, the president proved they had a machine. When I use the term secular socialist machine, I mean that. And he proved they have a machine when they got $787 billion with no elected member having read the bill. Now, no taxation without representation, a term Obama might remember from history, which was used by the Americans to explain why the British monarchy was unacceptable, actually means that representation has to know what they are taking your money for. So, if you have spending with no representative knowing what it is, you don't have representative self-government. You have a machine. And that was the first signal that this is very different. This is the most radical administration in American history. And I began to realize after a year of watching them that if you think about the group that meets together in the White House, their experience is the machine politics of Chicago, the corruption of Springfield, and the radicalism of Alinsky. And it comes together in a format, and then they meet with their two colleagues, Pelosi and Reid, and you have a perfect, unrepresentative left-wing machine dedicated to a secular socialist future. And what really got me to understand how different this period is, I believe this is the most serious conflict since the 1850s. And the reason I say that is the American people by last summer began to send a signal. They went to town hall meetings, they formed tea parties, the polling numbers got worse and worse. And the answer of the Democrats was to cancel town hall meetings, lie about the tea parties, and tell all their members to ignore the polls. Then they lost Virginia and New Jersey. Exactly as in 1993 they had lost Virginia and New Jersey. And I thought, gosh, that would be a signal maybe they should slow down and think about this. And they accelerated. And they wrote this grotesque pair of bills in the House and Senate that were utterly incomprehensible, the largest increase in government in our lifetime, absolutely unenforceable, and represented a kind of ludicrous big government, big bureaucracy, high tax, micromanagement, Washington-centered health system, utterly incapable of working. I mean, no rational person could believe that the current federal government could implement this. The federal government is such a totally bad, incompetent manager of the health system that in Medicare and Medicaid annually they pay between $70 and $120 billion a year to crooks. Now, we're not talking about marginal mistakes. We're talking about 5 pizza parlors in Miami that are certified as HIV/AIDS transfusion centers. We're talking about a dentist in New York who files 983 procedures a day. We're talking about, as the New York Post reported last week, people who stand at the subway station recruiting Medicaid people, put them in a van, send them to a dentist who cleans their teeth and charges the government for 4 or 5 procedures under Medicaid. I mean, the kind of stuff that you can't make this stuff up. The Russian mafia dominates durable medical equipment in Los Angeles. I mean, you can't make the federal government is so totally incompetent. They tell you they have a very low cost of administration because they just write checks no matter how stupid. Now, I mean, you can have a very inexpensive administration if you're determined to know nothing. And that's the group they want to expand to handle all of American health care. So you'd have thought at some point they'd have said, this is not going to work. So then we got to the final crisis. The polling numbers got worse. Historians will someday write that the longer Obama talked, the less the American people believed. And I'm not saying that to be negative about him. I'm saying it to describe the polling data that showed conclusively that the longer he talked about health, the weaker the bill got. Because the more he talked, the more people paid attention. The more they paid attention, the more they thought, this bill is really bad. Now, and this is the problem of trying to have a great orator sell a bad product, is you draw attention to it. And I would have said to you that the Massachusetts election was the decisive moment. And people all over the country spontaneously rallied. And in the last 14 days, Scott Brown raised $10 million on the internet, of which I would guess 9,900,000 came from people he'd never met. Because they were trying to send a signal. Now ask yourself, if the signal is Edward Kennedy's seat is captured by a Republican who's opposed to Obamacare, how could you get a better signal? Okay? So there's a moment of exaltation. I remember I was in Cincinnati with Rob Portman, who's going to be a great U.S. Senator, the night after the victory in Massachusetts. And we're all excited and we're all positive. We think to ourselves, if the Democratic Party members have now heard from the Tea Parties, from the town hall meetings, from the polls, from Virginia, from New Jersey, and now from Massachusetts, surely they will understand that there's a message here. And they did. It took them about a week. For about a week, they were stymied, and then they sat in the room at the White House and they said, you know what? We're going to run over the entire country. And they decided to ram through the health bill, no matter what the American people felt. And by the way, as recently as early last week, by about 54 to 34, the country wants the bill repealed. And they don't get it. I urge you to join me in talking about a secular socialist machine. It's important to be clear who these people are. They don't want to talk about it honestly and openly. But on every front, they're increasing government. On every front, they're trying to micromanage our lives. On every front, they want to raise taxes, spend more, have politicians become more powerful, and citizens become less powerful. And we need to make clear to the American people that this is not a normal series of elections. This is not two groups that share the same ideas and we're struggling over power. This is a fundamental fight over the core definition of America, and it is going to require us to talk, I think, in a very different language than normal politics. I think it requires us to talk about the American culture, not American politics. Does the work ethic matter, or is redistribution the alternative? It's very central. Are we endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Or does government define who we are? And I believe the radicalism of this administration and the incompetence of this administration make it possible to have a decisive choice for every American, and we need to make sure it's a choice of two positive versions, not Obama versus anti-Obama, but America versus a secular socialist machine.